MSPs tend to want to compare notes, and MSPs that are maybe 10 plus people that have started to bring in a management layer into their business, and they realize, oh, well, but they're doing it. How come I can't do it?
Paul Green's MSP Marketing Podcast.
Extended interview.
Good morning. My name is Luis Giraldo, Chief Experience Officer at ScalePad. How are you doing, Paul?
I'm very good, thank you. And thank you so much for coming back on the podcast. You were a big hit when you were on last year. Different company, and we'll find out more about your new company when we move on and talk about you later on. But where we are today, Luis, we are about a week away from June. And I know a lot of people would sort of realize from that, hang on a second, we're nearly 6 months into the year. Because it's so easy, isn't it, for Christmas to be a couple of weeks ago, and you're in January, and then you're in February, and you're meaning to get on to doing a whole load of things. And then suddenly you wake up and you're a week away from June, as we are right now. And, you talk to a lot of MSPs. I talk to a lot of MSPs. Do you think a lot of people will get to this point of the year and they'll be utterly shocked at just how little progression they've actually made in changing the business in that 6 months?
Well, no doubt. I think everybody goes through a little bit of that change. Even when February and March come around, everybody's like, wait, is it February already? Is it March already? And QBR season is typically in January. So MSPs, I know, are thinking a lot about their customers and their relationships and their strategy in the January, February months. And for it to be June almost already sounds like a crazy thing to consider. But it happens, sort of the time gets away from us. And by the way, as I get older, it seems like the weeks just meld into each other more and more. And so I don't know where time is going, but I hope people are getting things accomplished. It's that time where we have to take stock of what we've been able to accomplish so far this year and hopefully have some good goals for the rest of the year as well.
Do you think it's a uniquely MSP thing that stops us getting things done? Because the very nature of the business is, sitting, waiting for problems to happen and doing proactive work, and so little time is put into the development of the business that's how easily it can get away with you. Do you think that's the issue, or do you think it's just something that all business owners suffer with?
I think it's certainly habitual. I was chatting with Paul Dipple last year during a series of interviews we did with Enable. And one of the things he really was very strongly opinionated about is that anybody at any size of company has the ability to create that muscle memory of the habits that you need in your business, whether it's process, whether it's strategy, whatever it is that you're trying to do that you don't seem to ever have time for, you can generally create the habits for. And so I think it's just a matter of setting those priorities, figuring out what are the specific next steps that you want to accomplish. Having those goals, I think, articulated even in your own head makes a big difference to make progress throughout the year as you're trying to get things accomplished.
You must have read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, I think, wrote that. Have you read that book?
I have it on my shelf at home, actually. And so there's 3 books. It's the Steve Jobs one, it's the Atomic Habits, and it's one of the Patrick Lencioni books, which I like so much, called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. So those are the 3 keepsakes on my shelf that whenever I'm doing a video thing from home, people see those 3 books up on my shelf.
Yeah, and Atomic Habits is a great book, isn't it? It's one of the best-selling books on productivity, I believe. In fact, I think I'm sure James Clear sent an email out last year saying that it was still, in the top 5 of best-selling books of the year, even though it had been out for a number of years. It's a great book because it deals with habits in real life. I had a great habit for a decade or so of getting up at 5 in the morning to work on my business, and then it was actually the very first lockdown in 2020 I got out of that habit, because suddenly the pressures of daily life, I didn't need to be in the car at a certain time to take child to school. It didn't matter if I stayed up a bit later and had another glass of wine, because I could always have a lie-in the next morning, and you couldn't even leave the house. And I look back now a couple of years on, and I kind of, I wouldn't say I regret it, because I'm in control of my life choices, but that was certainly a great habit that I had for being very productive. The cost of that was I had to go to bed early, and that's maybe where that habit went. Do you think as we get older and older, it's harder for us to form these good habits which do make a positive difference to our business? So
there's that famed commentary about relationships and how men who get married, women often are trying to change their husbands for all the years that come after. And I have found that many of the behavioral scientists that I listen to occasionally say that that's not really the case. People don't really change; they just become more of who they are. And so I think the early development of those habits is super important, because even if that's not something that you do intrinsically, is not part of your personality, I find that you can still create the habit if you do it regularly enough. Interestingly, I think one of the challenges with the IT space is how out of left field everything comes at you, whether it's client emergencies or the reactive stuff. And so it's easy to be thrown off your habit game, because there's just constantly a barrage of things that are distracting you from that. But I think it's easy to create the habit. The other day I posted on LinkedIn, it was kind of surprising, because I had never gotten that kind of response to a post. And it was something, I was actually standing here in the office. It was early. The sun was rising. It was a beautiful, clear day. And I snapped a picture and I posted it on LinkedIn. I just felt particularly hopeful that day. And I said something like, I've decided that today is a fantastic day, or something like that. And the response that post got was really overwhelming, in the sense that, people direct messaged and were like, hey, I love that message. I love that sentiment. Lots of likes and people sort of expressing gratitude for just being awake that day, And it just kind of hit me that we have simple problems that have simple solutions. And sometimes you just have to make that daily decision of like, yeah, today is another day. Every chance you get to go out and do the thing, go out and do the thing and decide to do it. I think that's a great way to start the day.
But and you're right. We have simple problems, and the solutions are often quite simple, and yet somehow in our heads they get bigger and bigger, don't they? And if you look in the context of even just in human history, the problems that we're facing today don't really matter. You look at the universe and how just our lives are just finger clicks in the actual history of the universe. None of it really matters. Why do you think we build it up to be so big? I mean, is it because we care? We all care about these things, and we all would love to emotionally detach from these things. But you've lain awake at night worrying about something inconsequential. I've done it. Everyone listening to this has done it. And I have a 5-year diary, and where I just make a little note at the end of each day of what the day's been like. And sometimes I look back at the things I was worrying about 2-3 years ago, and it's like, why was I worrying about that?
I think it's just the context of it seems like it's a monumental thing to move a big mountain of a task, so to speak. You have to change this big process, and now you have to do it for all your clients. And it doesn't seem like you can move all of that in one go. And so people, I think, procrastinate on taking that first step. But there's that famous expression of like, even the longest marathon starts with the first step, or something like that. I'm probably completely annihilating that. But, back at the end of February, I went to NerdioCon in Cancun. Poor me, yeah, a conference in Cancun. You can pity me now. And one of the sessions that was there was Gabriela Schuster. She was a former channel chief at Microsoft, and she has been leading a big sea of change where the DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion topic is concerned. And so she delivered a really great session there. And it hit me when I was there that one of the reasons that we have so much challenge, I think, with driving diversity, equity, and inclusion in tech is that it just feels like a big thing to move the needle on. But it often starts with the one individual just providing a little bit of support for the person that needed to be included in a meeting or included in a topic or that kind of thing. And so it just hit me that we just over contextualize the grandeur of an issue and forget to just take that first little step.
Brian Tracy wrote very famously in a book somewhere, "How do you eat an elephant?" And the answer, of course, is
the first bite. You start.
Exactly. You take a bite and you take a bite, you take another bite. I did read once about a guy that ate a plane. He ate a small single propeller plane, and it took him 10 years. And I suspect he's very dead now because he's got an entire body full of metal. But he I remember reading the interview, and someone said to him, "How do you eat a plane?" He says, "Well, I knew it would take some time. So every day I just ate a little bit of the plane, and eventually I'm halfway through." Why you'd want to do that, I don't know. But there we go. So I guess what we're talking about here then is just drilling down whatever problem problem you've got, whatever challenge you've got, whatever's stopped you already taking action in the first 6 months of this year, you can get past that with good habits and breaking it down into just simple things that you can tackle going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is an area where MSPs tend to want to compare notes, and, they see what some of their larger colleagues are doing, MSPs that are maybe 10 plus people that have started to bring in a management layer into their business, and they realize, oh, well, but they're doing it. How come I can't do it? And it's because we tend to, as smaller MSPs, Jay McBain gave some interesting data points at that same conference, NerdyCon. The average MSP worldwide is 8 people. And at 8 people, you have a lot of the folks in your business wearing a lot of hats. And so it's easy to be distracted from some of these very focused, habitual tasks that are going to help drive improvement in your business or create process in your business. So I get that it's hard. But again, that's where that daily decision comes in. If you were to talk to one customer every day for the next, 2 months, you will have spoken to all your customers. But it just often feels like a much bigger, monumental task to take on.
Yes, it does. It absolutely does. Just as a side note, Jay McBain is possibly the world's greatest source of stats about MSPs. Every time I speak to someone and they say, oh, have you seen Jay McBain's latest thing? And it's always a new stat or a new thing that he's pulled out from somewhere. I think he's single-handedly feeding the entire channel with information about MSPs, which is just brilliant. Now, Luis, you and I are going to continue our conversation on YouTube, and we'll talk about that in a second. Before we do, tell us a little bit about ScalePad.
ScalePad is a business that it just felt like home when I joined ScalePad back in September of last year. I've been a customer of what was known as Warranty Master since 2015 or something like that, and so I've known the product, I've known the people for quite some time. Now, Warranty Master rebranded as ScalePad back in October of 2020 because the platform does so much more today. So ScalePad at its core is an asset lifecycle management platform, ALM. And so we do that by understanding what kind of equipment or hardware is in your client networks. We integrate with your PSA, RMM tools, and a number of that type of places where you have information about your devices. We bring in information about those devices, the software they're running, et cetera, et cetera. We give you a really nice picture of what's the hardware situation, are servers out of warranty, how old are they, and so on. Provide a nice dashboard hardware report for you to use for your meetings with your clients. In fact, some of our partners say how much they rely specifically on the ScalePad asset report for their QBRs or their strategic meetings and such. And last December, we acquired Backup Radar. Backup Radar is a platform that does a centralized oversight of your backup platforms for reporting, compliance, and risks, and so on. So, for example, as an MSP, we're always trying to standardize, and we always want to use a single backup platform wherever possible. Keep the simplicity at the maximum. It's easier to manage and maintain. But as you take on new clients, they may come with a different backup platform that you have to ingest. And so we help you centralize the reporting and the analysis of all the backup platforms that you might have to support at any given time. And so this plays a really interesting role inside of the ScalePad family because, again, we're helping raise insights and reporting across the entire estate of the client's infrastructure and giving MSPs a great way to use that for the strategic conversations.
That's great. And give us the website address, Luis.
ScalePad.com or backupradar.com.
There are so many good things that we have talked about already, Luis. So let's track back and look at some of those things. In fact, let's start with, you said people don't change, they become more of who they are. Do you really believe that? Or do you think that people can completely take almost a right angle and go off in a completely different direction if something big happens in their life to force them that way?
Yeah, I suppose some of those pivots are 100% possible, but I think it's not the majority of people. In one of those behavioral work tests that I forget what it was called. It's like Myers-Briggs or one of those things with the colors. I forget which one it is.
Oh, yeah. I know the one you mean.
But the person that was talking about sort of the science behind the behavioral analytics of that was just saying that, roughly in your early 20s is when the concrete sets on many things that drive your behavior, whether it's your values or your morals or things of that nature, pretty heavy stuff in your life. The concrete sets, early 20s. And so they sort of observed that people have this idea that you can change, but the behaviors just become amplified as we get older, I think is the general situation, or most of the people have that. And so I don't think people cannot change necessarily. I think that happens all the time, and we just get more. We dig in more into some of those things that we need to do if it's a critical change that we need to make in our life. But I think overall, people just become crustier and crustier. whatever way they were already, they're just going to be more of that.
I'm just thinking what kind of person I was like in my early 20s, and although I had plenty of bad habits, there was a very early for me in my work life. I discovered that you can do whatever you want to do if you want to do it badly enough, and if you're prepared to put the work in. And I actually discovered that as an employee. So, I was an employee of a giant media organization, but we were in little silos. So I was working in my little office, in a radio station somewhere, and although we were restricted by the corporate overlord in some way, we actually had a huge amount of freedom. And I managed to go from, like being a new guy in radio to running an entire radio station in about four and a bit years, which was always my goal. And that was almost a bit of a, wow, I actually did it. There was a lot of winging
yourself,
it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There was and nothing was perfect along the way. And in no ways was, there were hundreds of things that I would change if I did it again. But I guess you actually have a very similar thing, don't you? Because of your, the life experiences that you had in your 20s set you up very well, I think, for great success elsewhere.
I remember in my early 20s, I just moved to Canada. And back in my early 20s, I want to say, what was this, 95 to 97 timeframe, roughly. The iPod comes out in 1998 or 99. I can't remember the exact year. And I was a professional musician my whole life prior to that. And so this is sort of where the context of the story comes in. But when the iPod came out, it was the era of Napster and music sharing and all this stuff that if you look back today, the technology has kind of removed the need to do that because people can now consume things by the song or just stream it for a low monthly cost. But back then, everybody shared music illegally without any kind of remorse.
Yeah.
And so this is one of those things that at some point, as a musician, I couldn't connect the two parts of my life anymore. It's like, how can I be a musician who's trying to make a living from my art form, from my music, but also at the same time steal everybody else's music, and I worked on the cruise ships for a little while. I remember we would share hard drives of music that I'd never paid for any of that, but somehow I had this sort of collection of music on my iPod. And so part of it is maybe the tendency to hoard that we all have as human beings. We want more and more of whatever it is that we're interested in. But the other part is that I hadn't really stopped for 2 seconds to think about, my value system. And I think we don't do that in our early years. We don't question these types of things. And so moral standards don't really come into play until I think you start to become an adult and have to make decisions for yourself and have to live a life where you're responsible and accountable for your own actions. And all these things take an effect later on when you're starting a business as well. Who you do business with, whether you're going to take a client who is, making morally questionable decisions in their business, or, whatever type of relationship that you have. And so I find that those things all have, you look back, you can find that trace of that route that you took to get there.
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm off the beaten path now, but I think that's sort of the background musically and value system wise that I think drove a lot of how I wanted to do business when I ended up doing IT all of a sudden, and I was in music and computers and all that stuff. And I got into a retail sales job at a local Mac shop. And that's what got me into IT. I started doing residential IT consulting. And soon after I started doing business consulting, and that shifted into getting a managed services agreement and then sort of growing the business from there. 2008 was roughly when that first contract landed on my lap. A lot that has happened since. I've had the MSP for 16 years. It's gone through a couple of transitions. One, I sold the business in 2011 and then went back out and started it again in 2012 and brought some business partners on. And that's the business that we have today.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. You talk about iPods coming out in sort of the late 90s, early noughties, and I distinctly remember it was 2001 or 2002 going into there was at the time there was a big electronics chain in the UK called Dixon's, which doesn't exist anymore, and I remember going in and
I
thinking,
remember it.
Do you remember Dixon's? Of course you do. Yes, I remember thinking, do I
Of
get
course.
one of these iPod things, which I haven't got an Apple, so it would be difficult to use on my Windows PC, or do I get a Zune, a Microsoft Zune, which obviously, if had I have bought it, I'd have been only the fourth person in the world to buy it. And I actually ended up going with a mini disc Walkman. So most people don't remember mini discs, but working in radio, they were our sort of bread and butter.
Do.
It was and you'll remember them as well. They were like mini CDs in a case. And in fact, this one I'd looked at was they'd found a way to put MP3s onto a mini disc, so that kind of like tripled the capacity of it. It was amazing. But as you say, we all just were throwing around illegal music left, right, and centre. And this is the genius of Spotify, I think, because Spotify came along, and for $15 a month, you have every single song that's ever existed ever, and it feels it's almost like that hoarding mentality that we want of I've got all the songs. But it's legal. It's just an absolutely brilliant service to do it.
So you must also be the guy that bought a Windows phone. Let me just confirm that now for the crowd.
So I didn't buy a Zune, and I didn't buy an iPod. I bought a mini disc Walkman.
Disc player,
But I did have a Windows phone. I'm pretty sure I did. I
knew it.
I had something. There's a mobile phone network in the UK called O2. Is it still around? It might still be around, or it might have changed name. And they had something called an XDA. So it was one of the first PDAs, and it was amazing. It was pretty much the fast smartphone I ever had, but that ran on Windows, Windows Mobile. And I look back at it now, and it had a little stylus, and it ran my sat-nav. I remember putting TomTom into it and being amazed that I could actually run sat-nav on what was essentially just my phone. But there we go.
Oh wow. Wow.
So those top three books that people always see when you're doing webinars from your own home. So you said Atomic Habits was the first one. What were the other two books, and what are they about?
A Patrick Lencioni book called The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. This is an interesting book that years ago we read it. Work. We wanted to have a conversation prior to a strategic quarterly meeting or an annual meeting. And so we had a read of it. And I think the biggest takeaway from the book, I won't spoil it by giving away what it's all about, but the biggest takeaway for me was the concept or idea of you may disagree with the direction of something that's going to happen in the business, but in leadership, you have to just get on the boat and be rowing in the same direction as the rest of the leadership. Otherwise, if you're not able to do that, you have to catch yourself and question why, and question if you should be there still. Because I think it creates a lot of friction in a business when leadership is not all rowing in the same direction. So it's a tale told through the story of somebody that's coming in to work with a business and helping them overcome some of the challenges that they're having, and sort of they list out 5 dysfunctions that happen regularly in a team, and they work through the book on resolving some of those dysfunctions. So it's a really interesting. I couldn't put the book down back when I was reading it, so I highly recommend.
Yeah, I think I read the book off your recommendation when we've previously spoken. So what was the third book?
So it was the Steve Jobs biography. And the third one was Atomic Habits. Atomic Habits, I find, is one of those books I can't just sit and read the whole thing. I have to take it in small chunks and try to apply some of the things. It's so useful in so many ways. And there's so many life hacks of things that you want to try and implement. But some of them require a lot of repetition, a lot of process, and a lot of building habits. And so I try not to bite off more than I can chew, certainly with that book. It's not so much of an entertainment read as it is a frustrating read.
Yes, I get
all the
that.
things I should or could be doing that I can't seem to wrap my head around for whatever reason.
Yeah, completely get that. Lovely. Luis, thank you so much. As always, you've been very generous with your time. There's 2 things I just want to do before we finish this interview. First of all, just tell us a little bit more about ScalePad. And before our interview started, you were telling me about ScalePad strategy as well.
Yeah, so I was mentioning ScalePad was sort of the evolution of Warranty Master. Warranty Master is a tool that a lot of people were familiar with, but the rebrand and the move into the ScalePad name kind of caught people by surprise. ScalePad is just so much more than just a warranty lookup tool today. It's really an asset lifecycle management platform that helps you understand all the risks and insights that are in your customer networks, uncovers out-of-date hardware, unwarranted hardware, and so on. But we also do this with software. And so we have had partners tell us, for example, that because of ScalePad, they realized that their RMM was not patching some of their systems properly because systems were out of date, and ScalePad was actually detecting those insights and alerting them to that effect. There's also, we were talking about ScalePad strategy. This is a part of the platform we launched last October 2021. Consistent of 3 modules. There's the insights module, which raises awareness of these insights, of risks. For example, a server that's over 5 years and doesn't have warranty is a big risk to a business, for example. There's also the DMI component, Digital Maturity Index. The DMI score is like a credit score, assessing the infrastructure of your client's environment. And so we take all those risks and insights, and we use that to determine, based on our mathematics and back-end formulas and algorithms, a credit-like score for that environment, which we call DMI. And so we love DMI. Partners are already telling us how much this has enabled them having a conversation with their clients about improving the environment for their clients. It's something they can work on together to address. And it's not so much the salesy type of QBR or technology strategy meeting that MSPs have traditionally tended to have, where it just becomes a sales call. It's like, I'm here to have a strategy meeting, but really I'm here to just try and sell you in all these upgrades that we've been trying to do forever that we can't seem to get any traction on. But what we find is that the traction is missing because the customer has no shared accountability in the process, in the strategy process, and understanding the risk that they have in their business. So we love DMI for that. It's just opening doors to those conversations. And then finally, the third module of ScalePad strategy is called initiatives. In ScalePad initiatives, one of the things you can do is create a small, budget-like initiative that you can send to a client to approve. And what we're trying to do with the initiatives module, in a way, is quote unquote democratizing the quoting process to some degree. It's not a full-blown quoting platform. We don't want it to be farthest thing from that. But what we do want is we want more of the MSP teams having conversations with their clients about budgetary items, things that maybe get put off for too long. It's like you're doing a service ticket and that device is a 5-year-old workstation. It should be replaced. Well, what if that engineer was empowered to send a quick budgetary line item? They know the replacement cost. Hey, here's this budgetary thing, something you should discuss, and sort of be able to open the door to that conversation. So I think it's a powerful platform to have those initial budgetary approvals of big infrastructure changes.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much, Luis. I know your website is scalepad.com, which is a very easy one to remember. Final thing is we have to just reflect on your view.
Sure.
Show us your view there.
This is the ScalePad office. Yeah. We're on the 32nd floor here in a downtown office. That sort of round-like tower you see there is called Harbor Center. And you can go up there. It's sort of a viewpoint to see all 360 degrees of the city. We're facing east right now. So often, so you're seeing the Burrard Inlet. And so that goes into the interior Deep Cove area. And on that side is North Vancouver. I have to point you because the image is reversed when I'm looking at it on the screen. So I don't want to give wrong directions. So often I'm standing here, and if it's early enough in the morning, I'll see a beautiful sunrise. And it's fantastic. That was the thing that triggered that LinkedIn post the other day. It was a beautiful morning, and it just sort of was one of those things that created this dynamic of like, hey, you know what? It's a beautiful day. Today's a great day. I'm making a decision that today is fantastic. And it got an interesting reaction. And it just made me realize a lot of people just need some of the simple things like that to be reminded of.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely love it. And that's an incredible view to go into every day. So brilliant. Luis, thank you very much. As always, so generous with your time. Let's get you back on the podcast next year and enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Always a pleasure.
Paul Green's MSP Marketing Podcast.
Extended interview.